Welcome to our April 2024 Black, Brown and Green Voices programme. I'm Dr. Miriam Nyhan Grey, and I'm really honoured to be here with you today to share in a conversation with Briana Fitzsimons about this wonderfully important and wonderful new book called Black&Irish: Legends, Trailblazers and Everyday Heroes. Unfortunately, Briana's co-author, Leon, who would be well known in the circles due to his activity, great work around Black&Irish, the organisation, has been delayed in transit on a flight, he's in transit at the moment and he can't make it to our talk today. But Briana very kindly agreed to go ahead with this event, and I might preface the remarks by saying that we're in the presence of a native New Yorker, if I could say that about Briana. So we're really delighted, given our New York focus and background, to have an opportunity to talk to Briana about the book. I'm just going to run through a few housekeeping matters before I hand over to my NYU and African American Irish Diaspora Network colleague, Professor Kim DaCosta, to do the introduction. We are recording today's event and it will be published later on our YouTube link, which we will share, and you can share it with others or watch it back. We'll run for about an hour or so. In the first 40 minutes or so, Kim and myself will chat to Briana, and then we'll open it up for questions or comments. So please feel free to put some of those in the, it looks like the Q&A and the chat function are working there. So please don't be shy. Before I hand over to Kim, I'd just like to thank, on behalf of African American Irish Diaspora Network, I'd like to thank our colleagues at NYPL Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, in particular at John Brademas Center, Tom McIntyre and Polly Terzian, and at the Office for Global Inclusion at NYU. We're really delighted that they've come on board with the last few programs to co-promote them as well, and particularly Autumn Rain and Terra Nakata. And last but by no means least, at NYPL Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, we're so grateful to Sonia Richards and Joy Bivens and Lisa Herndon for all they do to get the work out to that really, really important audience through the Schomburg Center. So now let me hand over to my colleague and friend, Kim DaCosta.
Thank you, Miriam. So it's my pleasure to introduce Briana Fitzsimons, who's an award-winning author, anti-racism advocate, educator, and DEI specialist who grew up in Yonkers, New York, but has lived in Ireland since 2017. She was a secondary school teacher for 13 years and has been working in the area of anti-racism since 2021. Her award-winning book, Black&Irish: Legends, Trailblazers, and Everyday Heroes, was published in 2023, soon to be available here at the end of the month.
It's available though, yeah.
Is it available? Okay, and published in 2023 and is being widely used in schools across Ireland. Briana is also the co-founder of Spark Teachers, a pan-European community for racialized teachers, in collaboration with the European Network Against Racism. And she was named one of the 50 to watch in 2024 by the Irish Times. She lives in County Kildare with her partner and 2 children and is proud to call Ireland home.
Hi.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Kim, for that. And Kim, you're going to stay on and chime in with some questions as the conversation goes along. Briana, first of all, congratulations. I don't know, I think you were too modest in the bio that you sent us to mention that, and we have certainly mentioned that it has already won an Irish Book Award,
Yep.
and I believe has been nominated for a British Book of the Year award.
Yeah,
so congratulations.
Thank you.
Kim and I are pretty familiar with the entity of Black&Irish, which I guess is probably the genesis of the project. But for people who are online, especially on the American side, for whom this story might be new, Briana, would you tell us a little bit about Black&Irish and I suppose then the origins of this book project, and maybe describe the book a little bit for the people joining us today, if you don't mind?
Sure, of course. So thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here and connected to New York a little bit right now. So I'm very excited. I haven't been back in New York in about 5 years. So we're going back this summer. I can't wait. This is my little pre-entry, I think. But yeah, so Black and Irish was started by my co-author, Leon Diop, in 2020. He started it after, like the impetus for it was actually the murder of George Floyd in the US and kind of the global Black Lives Matter movement that popped up around. And he recognized that there was a need for an Irish conversation about this, specifically related to the Black and mixed race experience in Ireland. And because that was absent, it wasn't being talked about, it wasn't on the agenda of anyone, and it wasn't on anybody's radar. So he started an Instagram page with a few of his friends, and really it was storytelling. So the Irish are really well known for storytelling, right? So that was, he definitely tapped into that. But he was sharing stories of people were just kind of writing in, sending in photos and sharing their stories. So initially it was an Instagram page that shared, if you go back to the early days, it's just story after story. It's successes, challenges, you know, sometimes there was, you know, negative things, but most of the time it was really about celebrating like the experience and the joy and how great it was to have multiple identities and things like that. And yeah, it kind of grew from that into an organization. So I joined the Black and Irish team in 2021 in the spring as the education coordinator. And I was looking at the need for kind of, well, initially kind of education around the Black and mixed race experience in Ireland, but what came out of that actually was also the need for anti-racism in our schools and changing the curriculum and all that kind of stuff. So that's how I got involved. And I was there, I worked with the organization as a volunteer. We were all volunteers as well. So I did that for about 3 years, and I'm no longer working with the organization, but it was so amazing to kind of be a part of something new and something fresh. And I know Leon would talk, if he was here, he would talk about Jude Hughes, who kind of started a very similar organization back in the 80s. But it was really nice to kind of be a part of something that was really starting a trend, and now the conversation is on people's minds. It's being spoken about. I'm working with teachers all the time, every day right now on anti-racism, and we have the book. So the book came about, actually, it was our publisher, Little Island Books, which is a wonderful small children's book publisher here in Ireland. And they approached the Black and Irish team about turning kind of what we've been doing on the Instagram page into a book. And it just made a lot of sense. They had the idea, as obviously they're a children's book publisher, so writing a book for kids, but we actually really wanted it to be for teens. So it's actually a YA teen book. It's a 12+ book. And we wanted to make sure that we had something like a resource for teens, because the representation is just not there, especially for our Black and mixed race Irish teens. There's no stories. There were no things to talk about. Black History Month here is in October. Every October, we'd get emails and messages from teachers, you know, saying, what can we do? What do we do? Like, we're talking about the same people all the time. It's always American things, or, you know, or Nelson Mandela, or these are the only kind of Black figures that people were aware of. So we created this, and Leon and I kind of worked on the project. It took about a year, and we interviewed as many people as we could. And we had Jessica Louis, who drew, she's actually an artist based in Nigeria, and she drew the wonderful images in the portraits in the book.
Show you one
There's
there as an
Beryl.
example.
Yeah.
They're beautiful.
Beautiful. She did such a good job. And yeah, we created the book, and honestly, like, teachers started using that book before I even had a copy. I knew teachers were using it in schools. And we planned it. It came out on October 1st, so the start of Black History Month here. So that was unintentional. But they had it, and they were using it before I could even see it in person. So because there was such a need for storytelling of this kind in our school. So I hope I answered that question.
No, that's great, Briana. So
Yeah.
it looks like I counted it. It looks like you've about 25 biographies kind of profiled in it. And I suppose I've had the opportunity, I haven't had the opportunity to speak to you before, but I know from a while ago when Black and Irish was new, and correct me if I'm wrong in my interpretation of this, but my understanding of, you know, the kind of, informing of all this work is that it's celebrating the particularities of the Black Irish experience, cognizant of how, you know, in this small island, it borrows from the Black British experience and the Black American experience. But I suppose the wonderful thing about this tool, and particular for the age group that we're talking about, and probably demographically so important given the kind of demographic profile of many of our Black Irish community. It's to really kind of lean into that in particular, right? Briana, could you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that there were stories being told that weren't just about bad stuff. You know, like it's not just challenges, it's not just racism, it's not just difficulties and things like that. And we wanted to show that, we also wanted to show we have 25 people and they're all working in different areas of society. So that was another thing. So like the diversity within the Black Irish experience, right? It's not a monolithic thing. Like it's not like every Black Irish person is exactly the same, because how could that possibly be, right? So we wanted to make sure that we were telling stories that showed those celebratory nature and that joy that exists in the community and the amazing contributions of the members of the community, and show it in a way that was accessible for young people. And it's accessible for young people, which means it's accessible for adults as well, right? So it's something that it's not a big book. It's something that you can dip in and out of. You can read a chapter, put it down, you can read another chapter. I know a lot of teenage boys will flip right to Gavin Bazunu. He's the goalkeeper for Ireland, although I think he just had an injury. But there are kids that will find the one person, they will jump to that chapter, and that's totally okay. Maybe they'll keep reading, maybe they won't, you know, but it's kind of like a wonderful resource that for the first time, a lot of these kids are seeing stories that are not about bad stuff happening to Black people, which is unfortunately pretty much the only story that's been told, right, in schools. In schools here, they learn a little bit about the transatlantic slave trade. They learn a little bit about Martin Luther King. They might read a Maya Angelou poem. There are a few dips in and out, and they're all Black American experiences. Like that is all their understanding of it. They read Of Mice and Men in school. They read To Kill a Mockingbird sometimes. Like, so those are that's the limit of their understanding. So to have a book like this, that's not only done in a positive way, you know, in celebrating Black experiences, but it's also specifically Irish experiences, that it is a groundbreaking, I know our publisher wrote like groundbreaking book and stuff, because it's true, nothing like this existed before. And we wanted to make sure that we presented the stories in such a way that kids could get some inspiration from them and see themselves reflected in the stories, but also I always say, like, it's not just for the Black kids, it's actually for everybody to see these positive stories and get different stories than the same ones that they've been told kind of all along, and break stereotypes, build empathy, all that good stuff. So, yeah.
So can I build on Miriam's question a little? Because, you know, you've emphasized that it is Black and Irish, and that is important for Irish kids. But I'm curious if you'd say a little bit more about what those specificities of the Irish experience are for Black and mixed race kids. You're an American, yeah? And you have this, you know, dual cultural experience. And I'm curious how you see the specificities of the Irish case and how they come out in the book.
Yeah, so I have a lot of things, I suppose. I have lots of a multi-ethnic, I like to say, I suppose. So I have a lot of I'm Afro-Puerto Rican, German, Jewish, and I grew up in Yonkers. So I grew up at a super diverse place, if anybody knows Yonkers, and on the doorstep of New York City. And then I married an Irish guy and moved to Ireland. So I've got, and then have Irish kids, right? Half Irish kids. So I have this kind of, yeah, I do have this very interesting perspective, I suppose, of that outside perspective, but also that coming even into the situation with this kind of multiple, multi-ethnic, multi-heritage kind of viewpoint. So it's interesting, when I first arrived, the first Black Irish people that I met were my students. So it was really interesting to me to encounter that experience and learn about that experience through teenagers, because they're figuring out who they are anyway, right? So every teenager, I'm sure we all remember being teenagers. That's what teenage years are all about, right? It's all about experimenting and exploring and figuring out who you are and where you fit in the world. And to watch that play out and be a part of that experience, watching my students kind of go through that and see them try to figure out what it means to be Black and Irish. And now some people identify as Black and Irish, some people identify as Nigerian or Kenyan or Rwandan or whatever their kind of actual country of origin might be, or their parents' country of origin. But I think what was lovely about the organization Black&Irish, it was trying to be as inclusive as possible to that experience, because there are a lot of people on the island who would identify as Black&Irish. A lot of people would identify as Black just being not white. So like there's that kind of connotation along with it as well. But trying to open that up to whatever that looks like for you and making that as inclusive as possible, because there are so many different ways to be Black&Irish. And we tried to show in the book, we tried as best we could to show the different ways that the people that we feature in the book are Black&Irish. And some don't identify as Black&Irish, you know, some do have their own kind of ways of identifying, which is really important also. And those were conversations that we had as between Leon and I and the publisher, also in terms of language and wording, and when people use mixed race or multiracial or biracial, or, you know, and how to kind of hone in on the language and the words and what we should use. And I think we did as best we could to show the stories and as the people themselves would have wanted them to be told, right? And I think that was a big thing. So really trying to show the diversity within the culture, I think was really important for us. And I hope we did okay. You know, limitations were what they were too. We only could feature 25. There are 25, but there is a little insert in each one as well. So there's more like 50 stories in there. But, you know, within those kind of parameters, and 1,500 words per chapter as well. So we tried to keep it accessible and short, but we did our best, I think.
Do you imagine or observe that there are things about being Black and Irish today that are sort of distinctive than, say, you know, you referenced we were all teenagers once, but in the US context, certainly when I was a teenager, it's a different place, right? And I guess I'm curious what stood out among, you know, given that the students that you've met, but what is it about being in Ireland now that, if anything, seems really different to you than, say, the experience of, you know, being Black in the US and the
yeah, I think here in Ireland, it's now a much more diverse place than it was even when I first started coming to the island, right? So my first trip to Ireland, I think, was 2003 or something like that, like so early 2000s. So just at kind of the dawn of that wave of immigration that was experienced here. So I see the diversity here is massively improved, and it's wonderful. And I'm so glad to be here now, because I know I hear from people who grew up here, who are my age, but grew up here, you know, in the 80s and the 90s and things like that, and that wasn't here. So, you know, that diversity, being able to find hair products, being able to find basic things, get your hair done. People would fly over to the UK to get their hair done and get hair products and stuff like that. So I think there is so much more diversity, and even meeting young people here, like meeting college students and stuff like that, who will actually tell me that they actually had a wonderful time in school because they grew up in really diverse communities and they had lots of friends who came from similar backgrounds as them or things like that. So they had community and they felt like they belonged. So for me, that's amazing. Now, like that's but that's within the last probably 5-10 years, right? That's truly happening in some places, not in all places. You know, there are very small communities here where there are massive amounts of diversity. For the most part, it's not, you know, it's not as evenly spread out, I suppose, as you know, it could be. But compared to America, see, like, it's interesting for me because I don't remember talking about race growing up. Like, I came from this very multicultural household. We talked about our cultures, we talked about ethnicity, but we didn't talk openly about race in my house. And I, as a mixed race kid, I have a different experience actually growing up than my brothers, who looked a little bit different than me, right? Biology, DNA is funny. Every kid came out different and looked different. And so we had different experiences. So I would have talked about, not knowing what it was, I would have talked about the racism that I experienced, but it was not an open kind of forum for conversation because my parents didn't know how to navigate that. And actually, it's interesting, as an adult, I've talked to my mom now doing the work that I do, anti-racism and stuff, and talking to my mom about that. My mom was white, and my mom saying, you know, me saying like, yeah, this was tough, Mom. Remember, I used to tell you remember this, remember that. And she would remember incidents that had happened that I would come home and tell her about. But she also says, I didn't think it was that bad. And I didn't know what to do. And I didn't want it to be a problem for you. So I just kind of like she didn't have the tools to handle it, I suppose. So for me, my experience was maybe different than other kids growing up and at the same time as me. But we didn't talk about it at school. Like it's not something, it wasn't a conversation. Like anti-racism, I don't know the first time I heard it. I was definitely an adult though when I heard that there was such a thing. So it's interesting. And I think there are times like where I wish I grew up now, because even just looking at the books, the diversity of children's books, the diversity of TV shows, the diversity of all that kind of stuff, I wish, I often wonder, I'm like, what would my life have been like? What would my self-identity, like what would my understanding about myself have been if I grew up now compared to in the 80s, right? Like that's the kind of experience for me. So I think here, it's wonderful because we're also in a dawn of something here in Ireland. There's an awakening, there's an awareness, there's an understanding, there's a crying out for wanting to do better, which to me is really exciting. Yes, there's still a shying away from, there's still a, oh, but we're wonderful here. We're just welcoming. Everything's grand. Like that's such an Irish thing. It's all grand. It's great. But there is an understanding now, I think, of things need to change. And we're not in a polarized society yet in Ireland. Like we're starting to see that creeping in, but luckily we're not in a place like in America where there's so much tension. That's not here. So at least yet, I'm like, yet. So there's conversations are happening and they're being had, which I think is wonderful for our young people kind of growing up now. So yeah. Did that answer?
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's really wonderful to have this opportunity, and thank you for your openness and honesty with it all. Can I ask you, I think Kim's just gone to get a charger there before her computer dies. Can I just ask you in terms of the book process, Briana? I think I know the answer to this question based on some of my work around oral histories and engaging with Black Irish communities in particular in the United States. But can I just ask you, when you kind of approached people, how interested, how engaged, how cooperative were people with this project?
For the most part, everybody was wonderful. Like Leon and I kind of looked back at one point after the book had come out, and we realized that we had interviewed as far as humanly possible, because obviously some people in the book are no longer alive, but I think we interviewed 95% of the people that we could. So if it was me or Leon, or we had some members of the Black&Irish team conducting some of the interviews as well for us, so which was really helpful. But I don't think we had anybody. I mean, if they had said no, they wouldn't have been in the book. So that was, but I don't think anyone said, no, I don't want to do that. Like Paul McGrath is one person that's in the book that didn't want to be interviewed, but didn't mind that like we could include him. So like there's people like that. But like Ruth Negga sat down with Leon. Unfortunately, I had to work. I was teaching that day. She was here. I'm still like, what was I thinking? I should have called in sick. But Leon met her in town. She was in Dublin, and they had a like 2.5-hour chat. And she shared so much with him so he could write her chapter, and it was wonderful, And then she actually launched the book for us here as well. So she came just for the night so she could launch the book, and then she went back over to the UK. But just wonderful kind of openness. And I know all the people that I spoke with, and even the interviews that I could watch back, like people were so wonderful and trusting to share so much with us. And I always say that, like, I'm so grateful to them for trusting us to write their stories, because that's a big deal. Do you know what I mean? Like, who are we? Like to people knew Leon, a lot of people knew who I was at the time, and it was kind of like, you're trusting me, a stranger, to have a chat, and then I'm going to write up something, and you're trusting that we're going to do a good job. But I think knowing kind of the organization, knowing what we were hoping to do, knowing that it was going to be a book for kids, like I think that all really helped. And honestly, like we had people who were there's so many in there that are so excited. Like they were so thrilled. And like just what I was saying about having books that represent you now, like I think that was it. Like it was like, oh my God, like you're creating a book that I wish I had as a kid and I get to be in it. Like it's a big thing, you know? So we had some really wonderful, wonderful participants. Like I'm thinking of Lawson's the fashion guy, the creative director guy, and he was over the moon. And he couldn't, like, he shared every day on his social media, and he has loads of followers. Like he was like, he brought his mom and everybody to the launch, and it just, that energy and that enthusiasm was there for everybody that featured in the book. So it was great. It was wonderful.
Can I ask you, Brianna, I'm sorry to go to kind of a negative place, but my understanding is, because I think, and I hope I'm not putting you on the spot with it because I don't know whether, no, I think I did ask you, I think I might have run this question by you before. My understanding is the book won the Irish Book Award on November 22nd, I think, and
Yes.
then November 23rd for anybody tuning in who hasn't followed Irish events in Ireland over recent months. A riot took place on the streets of Dublin. And I'm using that word riot in a kind of loosey-goosey broad sense because I don't even know whether that's the actual, but I think that's how people are referring to it. And there was definitely a racial undertone, despite I think some of the reworking of narratives that I've heard a little bit since. So can you talk, would you mind, Brianna, just reflecting on that a little bit in terms of like just the unfortunate coincidence of the timing and just how you've kind of interpreted all that or situated on one hand this really positive event and project, and then the work, I think, because part of it as well is also, I think sometimes there's a tendency because of the history of the United States in particular, it's always like, well, they're very racist there and it's an American thing. And we don't have that problem here. We're the land of the thousand welcomes. And, you know, there's no, Irish people are not racist, right? We've all heard this. So would you talk a little bit about all that if you wouldn't mind?
Yeah, sure. So yes, so we won the On Post Book Award, the YA Teen Book of the Year Award on November 22nd, which was wonderful and surprising. And I mean, I didn't think we were going to win. I don't know if Leon did, but I was like, this is wild that I'm even in this room. Like it felt very surreal. And then we had to go up on stage and talk. And it was a wonderful night. And it was definitely like a high. Like it was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, and the book had just come out. Like it was great. And then yeah, the next day, it was also my daughter's birthday, so there was a lot of stuff going on for me the next day. But yeah, that evening, unfortunately, something really awful happened outside of a school. There was an attack, and there are members of the Irish far right, you know, the Irish kind of nationalists that are here and kind of spreading a lot of hate at the moment, jumped on the horrible incident that happened, and they used it as a call to action for racist, xenophobic people to come out in droves and riot on the streets of Dublin. And some really bad stuff happened that night. There were the tram, there was a Lewis set on fire, there were buses set on fire, there was really awful violence and horrific rhetoric being spread. And yes, it was all racist in tone, it was xenophobic in tone, anti-immigrant, anti-asylum seeker, and it was really scary. It was honestly, you know, my husband and I made the decision to leave America in 2016. We knew we were going to leave. You know, Trump had just been elected and all that but we knew we were leaving even before that happened. So I was so grateful to move here to a place where that stuff wasn't happening. And I remember the fallout. So it was the evening of the 23rd, and then like on the 24th, just feeling scared, feeling angry, feeling like this is what we left. Like we left this. We purposely came here because this wasn't a thing here. And here it is. So it was really scary, and I'm still nervous. There's still there are actually some more things have been happening in Ireland just a couple of weeks ago. an immigrant was killed in a town not far from me, just on the streets, and other people are being attacked. There were pretty awful attacks being shared in the news. And yeah, it's getting a bit scary. So I remember feeling really angry, really scared, and having this kind of like amazing moment with the book and this recognition with the book. And then like literally the next day, it's like it's like a slap, and fear. And I think there was some terms kind of being thrown around amongst racialized communities, just like if you're a visible immigrant right now, it's not safe. And I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I could go into town. I didn't feel like and I still feel that like on public transportation, if I'm by myself, I'm not super comfortable still. And that's not a cool place to be. Like that's not comfortable. But it does show just the need for this type of book, this type of conversations in our schools, like the need for conversations with our young people, especially because it was young people out there. It was young people kind of going out and doing the bad stuff. They're not young people calling the shots, on social media. The far right actors in Ireland are not young. But there is a lot of work that we can do and need to do in our schools around critical thinking and understanding and building empathy around different cultures and difference and, why migration happens and all this other wonderful stuff. But like, we can't have those conversations if the polarization gets to the level of an attack like that. So, it's really tricky and it's really difficult. Leon and I were on TV the following week, so we're kind of taking as many to talk about the book win, which was wonderful. But of course, we had to talk about this as well. But taking as many opportunities as we possibly can for people who are willing to listen, because I think while something like the riot is really, really awful and horrific, and it makes people afraid and things like that, what it also does is it wakes other people up to realizing that, okay, actually, we do have a problem here. Like there is a problem. That would not have happened if there wasn't an underlying level of racism going on. And the far right wouldn't be building their following here in Ireland if there wasn't an underlying level of racism going on in the community. So I think people are starting to realize that, oh, this isn't just about being nice to other people and being tolerant. We actually need to actively work on this and address what's going on here to actually prevent Ireland from becoming the United States, like from becoming other divided places. So I think that's the silver lining. I don't know if that's the right word, you know what I mean? But there's something that we can use this and the momentum of it to actually have these conversations in a much more direct way. And I think that is happening since then. So
it's funny you say that, Briana, because I've said it's, affirming to hear you say that, because I've noticed that too. I no longer get questions about racism in Ireland as much since then. Up until that, you would get people, saying, like people with no ill intention, very well intentioned, pretty well informed, saying, we don't have a problem here, do we? And you're kind of going, well, actually, there's a lot of work to be done, because anti-Blackness knows no borders, right? As you know. I don't know, like for you, Briana, as someone who grew up in Yonkers, New York, a place that's very proximate to patterns of Irish migration, you grow up a stone's throw from like some of the biggest Irish communities, and you're probably very well
Rory
aware.
Dollins is my local. Yeah.
Right. So you grew up in the heart of it, but this, the work we have to do, I feel really strongly as a historian of Irish migration. We've gone all over the world for centuries, and people say, oh, well, it's not the same. Well, it is the same, being you and being othered. And we know what that feels like in our DNA. So to kind of perpetuate or perpetrate this anti-immigrant and the anti-Blackness that we see, I mean, do you think we need to do more in terms of like pushing those narratives to remind people of our history?
I think so. Yeah, I think there's a lot more connections that can be made, especially in schools. Like I always think about schools. Schools are this is the space where we can have so much work. We have so much power over what kids learn and who they get to become, the information that they take with them into adulthood. And the links between communities that are also oppressed. Like, you know, the links between, let's say, like there's massive support for Palestine here because there's a solidarity with the Irish and the Palestinians because of colonization. So it's like, let's teach those links. Like, why are we not teaching those links? Teach the links. Ireland also was a massive supporter of, you know, anti-apartheid in South Africa. Like that was like, we need to teach that stuff. Like I didn't even know that until recently, you know, because I didn't grow up here, but there's reasons for that. So we need to teach that. We need to teach the colonization that happened here and how it's similar to what happened in other places and how that solidarity can span the globe. It would be wonderful. And yes, also teaching about, like, there are young people leaving Ireland right now in droves and going to Australia because of the cost of living here. So it's happening now again. So it's never really stopped, I suppose, but they're talking about that a lot right now. So again, like there's so many ways that we could teach this and form those links that we're not taking advantage of at all. So yes, I do think there's a lot more work that can be done. Yeah.
But doesn't that speak to maybe some of the underlying motivating reasons that flare-ups that are racialized in Ireland are happening now, in part because there's such growing and stark inequality, class inequality.
Yes.
So, you know, I'm curious how that is being discussed there, because to frame it only in racial terms is, I think, to miss some of the underlying reasons that people are starting to get territorial.
Yeah.
There's not enough jobs, not enough housing, not enough opportunity, right? So
No, it's definitely a
it's
class.
not a surprise that newcomers get targeted as the source of that problem,
Right.
as opposed to policymaking around the economy. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm curious if you've received, since the publication of the book, pushback. You've talked about the reception, right? A lot of teachers looking for it, Black Irish people happy about it. But have you experienced or gotten feedback from people that are like, we don't want this? In fact, this is undermining the possibilities of a more coherent and united Ireland. Not in the sense that.
Well, yeah, so okay, so the first thing, definitely class is a massive thing, and Ireland has always had a problem with class, I suppose. So this is, and also we have the Irish travelers and things like that who have also been racialized and oppressed and discriminated against for years. So there's underlying discrimination and oppression going on without even bringing race into the mix. But I think, and that has to be acknowledged, and I don't think that is discussed enough either. And I think there needs to be an intersectional approach to how we talk about all of this stuff in Ireland. And I think, yeah, I agree. And I was actually working for an NGO for a little while that was anti-fascist. It was anti-far right. We were kind of working with communities to kind of push far right out. There are systemic things in Ireland in terms of like the direct provision system that exists here. This is actually what's feeding the anti-immigration sentiment at the moment, is the fact that the government doesn't have a handle on how to support and house and process people who are seeking asylum. So there's this awful system that's here that is definitely a racialized system, because when the Ukrainian crisis began, Ukrainians were put into a different system. So there's two tiers going on here. So the government is feeding this stuff as well, and they're putting people who are seeking asylum with very little resources, limited access to things, and they're putting them out in the middle of nowhere in towns that also need support anyway. Like they're putting them in underserved communities as it is, and then they're just throwing a whole bunch of people in there and not supporting anybody. And unfortunately, these people are racialized. So like there's, you know, you're just compounding the breeding ground for the resentment, like, to be there. So I think we do have to talk about all of this stuff. Class is definitely a massive part of that. And yeah, in terms of pushback on the book, I haven't had any like directly. I've had on social media. So I had actually, before the book came out, we had it was Intel bought several books. They bought several copies of the books that they wanted to donate to schools, and we had another corporation kind of also doing the same. And there was a question for how are we going to send these to, like, what schools are we going to send them to? Who are we going to send them to? So I put a Google form together and I put it on Twitter and I said, any teachers want this book? Like, there's free copies here, sign up, tell us how many copies you want and we'll send them out, free copies of the book. Because that was the goal. I never used Twitter, or X, whatever it's called. I never use it. It was like my second tweet ever. But I just knew teachers were there and, you know, and librarians and stuff. So I said, okay, we need to use this space. It got picked up by the trolls or far right or whatever. And within like hours, there were 800, 1,000 comments, which actually helped to make it go a little viral. So I actually got a lot of responses on the form. But what happened was, I was then trolled and attacked for days. Like, it was, they targeted me. They found out who I was, what my ethnicity is. They found out that I'm, you know, part Jewish, like my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And so they're like, oh, they use that. The anti-Semitism went off the charts, and racist stuff and everything. And that I'm American, and they just went to town, and they started attacking me. So it moved away from the book and it just was anti-Briana. But yeah, it was very negative. And obviously at first, like, I knew what that was, and I didn't take it personally necessarily, but I said, oh, I must be doing something right if I'm pissing these guys off. So it was kind of like, all right, this is hitting a nerve, probably because it was going into schools. So I think that's where there was a nerve hit that, there's here's an American pushing an anti-racist agenda and we need to keep that out of Ireland. So yeah, that's actually the only time that I've had any kind of negativity, at least to my face. That wasn't even to my face, but do you know what I mean? Like, I haven't had anybody say anything aside from that actually negative. I don't know if Leon has, but I haven't. So.
I think, you know, you always bring that up, and it's so important in the American context in terms of the class aspect of the, you know, of how we talk about, you know, all of these discussions. And I think what I would observe as a historian of Ireland is, like, we're very good at saying we don't do class here. You know, the British, our next door neighbors, did class. We're a classless society, right? And the reality is, we don't have those firm delineations in the, like they would have and had and have probably in the British context, but it's there were gradations of class implied, at least in modern Irish history. So I think it's something that we really need to do a little bit more thinking about, in particular in the context of anti-racism and how, you know, migrants and asylum seekers are brought into the system, and sometimes, as Briana mentions, by a system that is not allowing them to even try to reach the potential that they want. I also think that some of it is, and this is kind of me thinking out loud a little bit here, and sorry to be dominating with this a bit, but I also think part of it is we spent so much time in our history, you know, looking at our colonizers and, you know, really, you know, and I'm not trying to, you know, deny it's as I keep saying recently, it's that, and right. And then we become, you know, we're this modern democratic society with all these things that we didn't have before in terms of inward migration, homelessness, things like that, things that unfortunately they're not right. None of the three of us would want them, but they're part of the maturation of the country. And I think sometimes we just haven't caught up with that process, because in relative terms, it actually happened very, very quickly. If you compare some of these progressions, say in comparison to American history, all of these things actually happen in a much slower way over decades and things like that, whereas a lot has changed in Ireland in a short period of time. I don't mean that as an apology, but I think we need to be more reflective on that in relation to some of these issues. I don't know, Briana, if you would agree.
Yeah, I think that is something that it often gets brought up as, like, unfortunately, as like a little bit of an excuse, you know, like, oh, this is
No,
new,
I hear you.
it's
Yeah,
new.
yeah.
And I hate the phrase "the new Irish." Like, that's a popular thing, like new Irish people. I'm like, what does that mean? But it does feel very yeah, new for people. But I always kind of bring it back to, travelers and the discrimination that travelers have experienced for longer than hundreds of years. And it's older than the state, the discrimination that they've experienced. So that's not new.
Yeah.
So I think the reflection needs to kind of go from, okay, this is different in terms of our economy and our democracy, and it's a new country if you think about it in that terms, right? It's only 100 years old. So like the state. So like we need to kind of move away from it being an excuse and move into it from being like, oh, actually there's been discriminatory practices for a lot of people, for, not move away from race, like, yes, travelers and things, but also the LGBTQ community and the disability community. And there's so many things that people are not treated fairly here. So we need to have that, like, it is really important, yes, bringing class into it as well, but that very much an intersectional lens in how we're talking about oppression here and discrimination here, because it's not just, I talk about race because that's what I talk about, but it's so layered. It needs to be, we do need to consider all of it. And there's a lot of wonderful progressive things happening in Ireland, like the marriage equality law and, the anti-abortion kind of thing passing and all that kind of stuff. So sorry, the abortion law passing, the anti-abortion law going away. So that's all really progressive and important, but there's other stuff going on as well. And especially as our disability community and things like that are not being served. I could go on and on, but there's, I think, reflection, yes, and having context, yes, but also there's other stuff that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, and not deflecting it to we don't do that. I guess ultimately I think what I was trying to get at there is we are good at the deflections in terms of that's somewhere else, and it's not us. Sorry,
Definitely.
Kim, did you want to come in there?
Oh, I was just thinking, I mean, I don't shy away or think we need to run away from the idea of something being new. In terms of the sociological phenomena at hand, it's not, as you said, it's not that there have never been groups who have been mistreated, discriminated against, or prejudicial views about. But it is new if you have new groups entering a society. That's a phenomenon that you have to address for what it is. It doesn't mean that is reflective of people not necessarily being a part of the place. I think that I understand your discomfort with the term, but I think we have to address that societies do change. And if we can't get comfortable with that idea, that it actually is new to have this percentage of the population to be of African descent, and that we understand that has a valence and a cultural resonance that we can't pretend it doesn't have. So dealing with it head on, to me, is what is required, not pretending that it's the same as other histories, other times, other places.
Yeah, I just don't like the term, I suppose. It just makes me feel icky. I don't know, like, what does that mean? Like, who are we talking about? I suppose I also hear it in the education context, and I'm like, these are kids. So like it's like another word for, it's another acronym, or it's another, BIPOC or something like that. Like, it's just an umbrella term. And I'm like, what does that mean? So I think for me, it just makes me feel like we're sweeping everybody with the same brush rather than actually like thinking about what this means in terms of different experiences and coming from different countries and different languages, different cultures, different religions, and all that kind of stuff. So where it can be said in a way of, we're talking about all of these kids, but there's so many different things going on within that group of kids. So
yeah, I think that's a great point, especially with respect to kids who aren't thinking of themselves as a demographic category. They're thinking, this is the place, this is the only place I know.
This is home.
This is home.
Yeah.
And so the idea that you are forever new when
and there's people who are called new Irish when they've lived here their whole lives, and they're 40, like, they're not new. Like, so I think it's just a little bit of an understanding. I like how you're saying about, like, yes, we need to embrace this and understand it and recognize that it is different and it is something that is new, but making sure that we're not, like, like there are conversations that I'm in sometimes, and it's always talking about migrants and asylum seekers and things like that. I'm like, not everybody who's Black or brown in Ireland is a migrant or is an asylum seeker or went through that process. So like, it's dangerously close to sweeping everybody in the same kind of group. And that's why I say, no, there's actually there's lots of different ways people came here and are here. People were born here, people were, so it's just, like it's uncomfortable for me because I just feel like it's not accurate, I suppose. So
Yeah, and it's lacking in nuance.
yeah.